My name is Olivia Wilson, and I'm 32. For the past 9 years, I've poured my life into our family business, a mid-sized logistics company my father, Michael, built from nothing. If you have ever felt betrayed by the people who should have been your biggest supporters, let me know where you are watching from. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. Loyal clients, a dedicated team, and systems I'd helped construct from the ground up. I loved the rhythm of it. The hum of trucks at dawn, the meticulous spreadsheets, the satisfaction of every successful delivery. Dad loved the business too, but lately he had become increasingly distant, content to sit back and smile during meetings, as if he were watching his legacy unfold without effort. I assumed I was his partner in that legacy, maybe even his successor. I couldn't have been more wrong. The first hint came one Monday morning, wrapped in what seemed like a routine request. Dad asked me to come in early, before the team arrived. Nothing unusual, except the tone, rehearsed and oddly formal, that hinted this wasn't just another planning session. I walked into his office, coffee in hand, and found Brandon, my younger brother, perched confidently across from him. He'd just graduated at 26 and had spent most of the past years dabbling in cryptocurrency and social media ventures. His crooked grin, half smug, half innocent, made my stomach twist. "Olivia," Dad said, gesturing for me to sit, "we've been thinking about the future." I glanced at Brandon, that grin, the one he had when he pretended to forget my birthday last year. I nodded slowly and took my seat. "I want you to train Brandon," Dad continued. "Show him the ropes, accounts, clients, systems. Eventually, I'd like him to take over operations while you focus on strategy." I blinked. "Take over operations? Like my role?" "Yes," Dad replied smoothly. "You'll oversee the big picture, natural progression." Brandon leaned back, still smirking. "Don't worry, sister. I've got this. Only a little refresher needed." I should have protested, demanded clarity, but I didn't. I smiled, nodded, and left the office, stomach churning. Over the next few days, the reality sank in. This wasn't a temporary shift. I was being moved aside, quietly demoted, while Brandon assumed the role I had built. He strutted through the office like he owned it, asking interns where the energy drinks were, flaunting his new wristwatch as if it dictated freight management. Meanwhile, I waited for Dad to intervene, to reassure me that this was only a transition. But that conversation never came. My office was repainted without notice. My nameplate disappeared, emails redirected, my title erased. I wish I could say I snapped, threw a tantrum, stormed the boardroom. I didn't. I kept the operations running, arriving early, staying late, answering questions Brandon didn't even know to ask. I did it because I loved the business, because it had become part of who I was. Then came the first disaster. 8 days into his new responsibilities, Brandon terminated a long-standing contract with Shannon Freight Lines, a family-run trucking firm loyal to our company for decades. 2 of their trucks had veered off route into a storm zone due to his misguided efficiency optimization. One driver was hospitalized. When I tried to smooth things over, I discovered Brandon had already emailed them a GIF of a shrugging man, captioned, "We live and learn." Humiliation burned through me. I called Dad. "This is terrible," I shouted, pacing behind the warehouse. "They're emergency drivers. We could lose them." "Give him slack," Dad replied casually. "He's learning." I laughed, a hollow, bitter laugh. "You would have fired him at his age." "You're 32. Handle it." There it was. Not an opportunity for Brandon. It was a mandate for me to carry him. The subtle sidelining intensified. Reports that I once evaluated were now sent to him. Client relationships I nurtured for years transferred to his control. Teleconferences excluded me. My world, the empire I'd helped build, was slipping through my fingers. 3 days after Brandon's so-called promotion, I walked into the break room to find my team huddled around him, cupcakes in hand. "Promotion treats, Bae," he announced, grinning. They glanced at me silently, as if I'd entered the wrong room. I didn't speak. I turned and walked straight into Dad's office. "You made him chief of operations?" I asked quietly. "It was inevitable," Dad said, closing his laptop. "Better to tear the Band-Aid." "No, you don't tear a Band-Aid off someone who is bleeding out," I replied. "You fix them first." He stood, walked around his desk. "If this is about respect or ego, you misunderstand. You work here because I allow it." The words hit me like ice. 9 years of blood, sweat, and strategy reduced to permission. I paused, heart pounding, and said, "Then I resign." Dad raised an eyebrow. "Are you serious?" "Yes." I left quietly. No dramatic exit, just silence. Outside, the bitter air swallowed me whole. I did not sleep that night. My phone buzzed endlessly. Friends, colleagues, Brandon with his mock farewell meme. I ignored everything, staring at the ceiling until dawn, wondering who I was now, stripped of the business that had defined me. The worst part wasn't the betrayal. It was the identity crisis. For nearly a decade, I was the backbone of the company. Now I was just Olivia Wilson, 32, unemployed and unmoored. Yet deep down, beneath the exhaustion and anger, a spark began to glow. I would rebuild. I would rise. I would make them see what it meant to underestimate me. The following days felt like wandering through someone else's life. My apartment, once a place of rest between 9-hour shifts and weekend logistics marathons, now felt like a gilded cage. I sat at the kitchen table, hoodie on, staring at a cold cup of coffee. My laptop lay open, but untouched. I hadn't applied for a single job, hadn't called a single client. All I did was replay that meeting with Dad over and over, the ease with which he handed my world to Brandon. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just felt invisible. The sense of purpose that had anchored me for years had been ripped away, replaced by restless fury and hollow confusion. Then the text started. Tyler, our head of fleet maintenance, sent the first one. "You did not deserve that, Olivia." 5 words, and something inside me, long dormant, sparked. Slowly, others followed. Sophia from accounting, Olivia from customer service, even 2 of our junior dispatchers reached out. Each message was a small thread, knitting together the reality I already knew. I hadn't been betrayed because of failure. I had been betrayed because they wanted me gone. Yet that was not enough. Anger simmered beneath the surface, but it was calculated, deliberate. I wasn't going to storm back into the company and demand justice. I was going to create something they couldn't ignore, something that belonged to me, built from scratch. It came to me, one restless night, staring at the ceiling at 2:00 a.m., while scrolling through industry job boards. A freight brokerage training program popped up. I didn't need it. I could teach it. But the seed was planted. Why work for someone else? Why re-enter a system that had discarded me? I knew the business, the clients, the drivers, the weaknesses in every system. I didn't need a warehouse, a fleet, or fancy software. Just a plan, a laptop, and the audacity to start. That night, I opened a blank document and labeled it Phase 1. I began contacting old clients quietly. No sales pitch, no pressure, just listening. The first call was to Shannon Freight Lines. Their driver had recovered, the tension had eased, and yet the loyalty they once had for my father's firm was fraying. "Olivia?" Claire Sullivan's voice was cautious but warm. "It's good to hear from you." "I'm just checking in," I said softly. "If there's ever a need for someone who understands your operations, I'm working on something. Nothing official yet, but would you be interested if I could offer better service?" A pause. Then, "You'd be our first choice." That was all I needed. Within weeks, I formed Forge Logistics, my own company. The first days were brutal. A folding table in my living room, a single phone, and a mountain of spreadsheets. No assistants, no administrators, just me. I coordinated drivers, tracked shipments, handled invoices, negotiated rates. Every error, every sleepless night was mine, and mine alone. Yet the transformation went deeper than logistics. I became something else entirely. A presence, a force, one that my former colleagues and clients couldn't ignore. Word spread quietly. By the second month, I had 4 loyal clients, all disillusioned with Brandon's incompetence. I saved every email, every misstep, every example of mismanagement, not to mock, but to understand where the cracks were and how to build something stronger. And then came Natalie Haynes, a procurement manager I had clashed with years ago. Her call was abrupt, her tone sharp. "I heard you're back in business," she said. "Still alive," I replied, smiling at her humor. "Your brother promised a 3-day delivery. Took 6, and now he wants to adjust expectations." I leaned in, even though she couldn't see me. "He's drowning," I said simply. "Pretending it's performance art." She laughed. "Email me your pricing. If you can promise 5 days or less, you've got our business." That was the first crack in the empire they thought was secure. I poured everything into delivery, updates, care, and consistency. In 3 weeks, 3 more clients joined Forge, attracted by reliability and honesty, qualities my father's firm had neglected under Brandon's leadership. Brandon remained oblivious at first, too busy posting motivational quotes online, hosting ping pong tournaments, and flaunting his authority. Dad noticed. "Olivia, I hear you're working with our clients," he said over the phone. "They are clients," I replied calmly. "They go where service is." "Do you understand this is not a game? You're burning bridges." "No," I said. "The bridges were already burned when you passed them to someone unprepared." That night, I stayed at my desk until dawn, not revising spreadsheets, but drawing a map. Clients, vendors, weaknesses, inefficiencies. I wasn't planning revenge. I was building inevitability. The pieces were aligning, slowly, precisely, like chess. And beneath it all, a quiet, persistent satisfaction thrummed through me. They had underestimated me, and they were about to discover just how wrong they had been. By the 3rd week, Forge Logistics was no longer a fragile experiment. The living room table had been replaced with a small office desk. Spreadsheets were refined into organized systems. Phone calls became a rhythm rather than chaos. I had 8 steady clients, a pair of virtual assistants, and a network of freelance drivers who respected and trusted me. Unlike Brandon, I treated people like partners, not pawns. Yet my focus was never purely growth. I wanted more than survival. I wanted precision. I began quietly documenting everything I could: mistakes Brandon made, miscommunications, mishandled shipments. Every misstep was recorded, every conversation logged. If I ever needed leverage, I would have it. The first key ally was Marco, the longtime systems administrator from my father's firm. Quiet, meticulous, underpaid, almost invisible under Brandon's new regime. Marco had always respected competence over charisma. I arranged a meeting at a dimly lit pub, one of those places where the music hums and the whiskey burns just enough to focus the mind. "I hear you're running your own thing," he said, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I am," I replied, "and I hear the new management is struggling." He smirked knowingly. "They're clueless. HTML is now some cloud thing in their heads. Clients are upset. Staff morale is tanking." I leaned in. "I need information. Hypothetically, if someone knew of vulnerabilities, past backups, or internal audit logs from the last quarter. Nothing illegal, just details that show patterns of failure." 3 days later, a secure zip file appeared in my inbox. Emails, transaction logs, voice recordings, internal memos, proof of Brandon's incompetence and deliberate missteps. It wasn't for blackmail, it was strategy. Knowledge as power. Then came the clients. One by one, I scheduled quiet lunches, parking lot meetings, even casual coffee drops. No pressure, no hard sell. I wanted to understand what they needed, how they had been neglected, and how I could serve them better. Many were already familiar with Forge, but they were cautious. Trust had to be rebuilt. The tipping point was Natalie Haynes, the procurement manager of a medium-sized agricultural supply chain. We had clashed years ago over a late shipment, yet she respected competence. Her call was abrupt. "Olivia, your brother promised a 3-day delivery. Took 6, and now he wants to change expectations." I smiled despite the tension. "He's drowning, pretending it's performance art." She laughed, relieved. "Email me your pricing. If you can deliver in 5 days or less, you've got our business." I poured every ounce of energy into delivery. Precise updates, personalized care, fast turnaround. She was impressed, and soon her industry contacts began calling. One by one, other companies, disillusioned with Brandon's leadership, joined Forge. Brandon remained oblivious, too busy curating his social media image and organizing team ping pong games. But Dad noticed. "Olivia, I hear you're working with our clients," he said carefully over the phone. "They are clients," I replied calmly. "They go where service is." "You understand this is not a game. You're burning bridges." "No," I said. "The bridges were already burned when you handed responsibility to someone unprepared." The satisfaction was quiet, almost meditative. Every delivery completed, every client impressed, every team member motivated. It was building momentum that Brandon couldn't imagine. He thought charisma alone was enough to run an empire. I knew otherwise. I wasn't just building a company, I was creating inevitability. Forge Logistics was no longer just surviving. It was poised to outlast and outsmart the empire that had discarded me. And with Marco's insights and my growing network of loyal clients, I could plan the next moves with surgical precision. At night, alone in my office, I allowed myself a rare smile. They had underestimated me. And soon, every mistake, every mismanagement, every moment of incompetence under Brandon's tenure would become undeniable proof that the foundation they trusted was rotten. This wasn't about revenge. Not yet. This was about control. The narrative was shifting. I had started from nothing, yet I was already moving faster, smarter, stronger than the empire that had cast me aside. The reckoning was inevitable, and I could feel its pulse in the quiet rhythm of the office, in the text messages from loyal allies, and in the quiet, determined smile that never left my face. By the beginning of the 4th month, Forge Logistics had become more than a fledgling company. It was a quiet force. Clients trusted us, drivers respected us, and every delivery ran like clockwork. Brandon, still oblivious, continued to parade around his office, posting motivational quotes and hosting pointless team-building exercises that made employees roll their eyes. I knew it was time for the next phase, leverage. Knowledge was power, and I had amassed a library of Brandon's mismanagement, deleted emails, altered memos, and recordings of him undermining staff. It wasn't vengeance, it was proof. Proof that the empire they trusted was failing because of incompetence, not circumstance. The first strategic move came with Marco's help. Over a late evening meeting in a quiet cafe, we reviewed the files I had gathered. "Olivia," Marco said, tapping the screen, "this is all here. Every misstep, every lie, every ignored warning. You could destabilize them overnight if you wanted." "I don't want to destroy them," I replied firmly. "I want them to see the truth, and I want Forge to emerge untainted." Our plan was subtle. Quiet conversations with remaining loyal clients, not aggressive poaching, just reminding them what real service looked like. Personalized emails, small gestures, attentiveness that Brandon's flashy, careless style never allowed. The breakthrough came from Natalie Haynes. Her network was wider than I realized, and once she began speaking positively about Forge, the ripple effect was immediate. Within a week, 3 of her industry contacts had approached me directly, expressing frustration with Brandon's failures and interest in moving their business. Meanwhile, Brandon's facade began to crack. Rumors of missed deadlines, botched deliveries, and frustrated staff started circulating within the office. Investors were uneasy. Dad was quiet, watching from the sidelines, his silence both warning and opportunity. I arranged a lunch with Dad at the familiar Greek restaurant, the same place where he had first told me I'd had my time. I arrived early, letting the warmth of the restaurant settle my nerves. When he arrived, his expression was measured, almost wary. "I hear about Forge," he said, settling into the booth. "We are doing well," I replied evenly. "Clients are happy, drivers are loyal, operations run efficiently. It's what you wanted, someone who knows the business inside and out." He studied me silently for a long moment. Finally, he said, "Brandon has been adjusting. It's difficult for him." "I'm sure it is," I said, holding back a smile. "But let's talk about how we can make it right. You've lost trust, Dad. He's incapable of maintaining it. I can help stabilize what remains without unnecessary destruction." Dad's jaw tightened. "You're offering a way out?" "Yes," I said. "A clean, generous path. Buy out the largest remaining accounts. They're already interested. You keep the rest. No one has to lose face." He leaned back, incredulous. "You're giving them a chance to save anything?" "I'm giving them a chance to save what they can manage. Everything else will continue under Forge, and they'll see that leadership is earned, not inherited." He exhaled, the weight of realization settling across his shoulders. I need to speak with Brandon." "Take your time," I said, "but the clock is already ticking." After that meeting, I returned to the office and focused on visibility. I reached out to a local business podcast, one I had helped years ago. I shared my story, not as vengeance, not as boasting, but as a narrative of survival, competence, and leadership earned. Names weren't mentioned, but the subtext was clear. The response was immediate. Inboxes filled with inquiries from potential clients. Former partners who had been neglected under Brandon's management reached out. Employees who felt overlooked began asking to join Forge. Momentum was building. Brandon, still in his neon-lit office, remained unaware of the storm gathering outside his walls, but he could feel the shift, a subtle, disorienting change in emails, client communications, and quiet whispers among his staff. He had underestimated me. He had assumed that charisma, social media posts, and flashy games were enough to maintain control. I had proven otherwise. And yet I remained patient. This was not chaos, it was precision. Every step was calculated, every move considered. I wasn't trying to humiliate him. I was letting reality do that. The empire was crumbling not because of me, but because it had never been stable to begin with. By the end of Part 4, Forge Logistics had grown from a small living room operation into a recognized, trusted competitor. Brandon's mistakes were no longer isolated. They were systemic. Investors were uneasy, staff morale was plummeting, and Dad had begun to see the truth that I had lived with for months. The next phase would be confrontation, but not in the explosive, dramatic way people expect. This would be controlled, deliberate, a quiet dismantling of a house built on favoritism and incompetence, piece by piece. It was a Tuesday morning when I decided the time had come. Not by accident, every move had been calculated to maximize impact. The quarterly review at Dad's firm was scheduled for the afternoon, and I knew Brandon would be seated at the head of the table, blissfully unaware of the storm about to arrive. I arrived early at Forge, checking my spreadsheets one last time. Everything was ready. Client commitments confirmed, delivery schedules optimized, and my team prepped. But the most important part wasn't logistics, it was timing and evidence. By mid-morning, my phone buzzed. It was an email from Marco, the internal audit logs, the deleted emails, the voice recordings, everything Brandon had tried to hide, carefully organized, ready to present. I didn't rush. I sipped my coffee, letting the weight of months of planning settle, 8 months of starting from nothing, building a team, and proving every lesson I had learned the hard way. This wasn't just about business. It was personal in the quietest, sharpest sense, validation, justice, clarity. By noon, I was in the car, driving to the restaurant where Dad had finally started to face the reality of Brandon's mismanagement. I had scheduled lunch, a calm setting, no witnesses, no theatrics. Dad arrived moments later, his expression a mixture of apprehension and grudging respect. "Olivia," he said, "I didn't expect this level of organization. You've done well." "Thank you," I said, my tone even. It's what happens when competence matters more than favoritism. He didn't respond immediately, only nodded. I placed the folder of evidence on the table between us. Everything here, audits, emails, voice recordings. You'll see exactly what's been happening while you were distracted. It's not just mistakes, it's negligence. Dad flipped through the pages, his brow furrowed. I watched quietly. The old comfort of familiarity, the family business, the predictable hierarchy was gone. All that remained was truth. "Brandon, Dad's voice trailed. "Exactly as you see," I said. "He's incapable of running this alone. Employees are leaving, clients are unhappy, and investors are nervous. You've witnessed the beginning of the fallout. Now, you can either act or continue to lose everything." He didn't argue. For the first time, I saw a hint of regret in his eyes. Not for me, but for underestimating reality. "And you want what?" I met his gaze evenly. "I want 2 things. First, for the accounts that Forge can manage to be transitioned cleanly. Second, I want closure, for all of us. Brandon needs to face the consequences of his actions. Nothing vengeful, just inevitable." Dad nodded slowly. "I'll speak with him. I see now." That afternoon, Brandon arrived at my office without warning. His face was crimson, eyes wide with a mix of anger and disbelief. My team watched quietly, sensing tension, but unsure of the details. I gestured toward the conference room. "Olivia," he spat, "you think you've won? That this is yours now?" I didn't rise to the bait. I let him pace, watched the frustration radiating off him like heat from a furnace. Finally, I spoke calmly. "Brandon, this isn't about winning or losing. It's about reality. You were given the tools and the position to succeed. You failed. I didn't sabotage you. I stopped saving you." His mouth opened to argue, but I ignored him. "Everything else you see, the accounts, the clients, the investors, that's a result of competence, diligence, and leadership earned, not inherited. Silence filled the room. Brandon's rage faltered. The words had landed, sharp and immovable. I turned and walked away. My team followed, the hum of work continuing as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The truth had been delivered, and there was no undoing it. Over the next few weeks, the cascade continued. Investors performed audits. Employees resigned from Brandon's firm, and clients formally transitioned to Forge Logistics. Dad attempted to stabilize what remained, but the damage was irreversible. The empire he had built with Brandon as the heir crumbled quietly, without spectacle. Forge Logistics, on the other hand, flourished. We didn't need press releases or dramatic announcements. Our work spoke for itself. Clients trusted us, drivers were loyal, and my team felt empowered. Every mile driven, every delivery completed, every client interaction became a testament to perseverance and integrity. One evening, I sat in my office, now a real space, not a temporary setup, with my team laughing over shared stories. I glanced at my phone. A message from Dad appeared. "You were correct. I was not prepared to acknowledge it before. You've built something remarkable." I read it, smiled faintly, and set the phone down. Finally, there was closure. No need for approval, no need for vindication. The work, the loyalty, and the truth had been enough. I leaned back, the hum of the office around me, and for the first time in months, I felt the quiet satisfaction of having reclaimed my world. Everything else, the betrayal, the favoritism, the chaos, had been left behind. What remained was mine, built with my hands, my decisions, and my perseverance. The weeks after the confrontation were surreal. The air seemed lighter, almost suspended, as if the storm of betrayal, mismanagement, and hidden resentments had finally passed. Forge Logistics continued to grow steadily. Our client base expanded, and the team felt more cohesive than ever. But what struck me most was the quiet satisfaction of building something entirely my own. I often found myself wandering the office at odd hours, walking past desks where my team laughed over deliveries or shared a joke about a misrouted package. I paused in front of the whiteboard, which was filled with plans, client notes, and ideas that had been waiting months to come to life. My fingerprints were literally everywhere, on every strategy, every spreadsheet, every email sent, and yet this was no longer a prison of obligation. It was freedom. Dad's occasional messages arrived brief and measured. "Olivia, I've been reflecting. I underestimated you. Truly remarkable." They no longer carried pressure or expectation, only acknowledgement. It was enough. Brandon was gone from the picture, his presence reduced to a cautionary tale whispered among those who had stayed at the old company. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Watching him scramble to regain credibility elsewhere was confirmation enough that leadership, respect, and competence cannot be inherited. They must be earned. One late evening, as I closed my laptop and stared out at the city skyline, I realized how profoundly I had changed. The betrayal, the manipulation, and the injustice had all shaped a version of me that was stronger, sharper, and more resilient. I no longer questioned my instincts or doubted my capabilities. The lessons were etched into every decision I made. Trust must be earned, loyalty cannot be demanded, and power, true power, comes from action, not entitlement. I remembered the early days after walking away from my father's office, when the apartment felt like a prison and my hands shook from frustration and uncertainty. Back then, I had thought I had lost everything. Now I saw that I had gained something far more valuable: autonomy, respect, and the quiet knowledge that I could build, defend, and nurture my own vision. My team celebrated small victories with genuine excitement. Client contracts secured, deliveries completed flawlessly, a team member promoted for exceptional initiative. Unlike the hollow celebrations at Dad's firm, these were earned, shared, and authentic. I felt the warmth of connection, of trust reciprocated, and of effort rewarded. I also began to mentor others, quietly and without pretense. New drivers, planners, and coordinators came to me seeking guidance, and I gave it freely. I shared not just logistics knowledge, but lessons in resilience, judgment, and moral courage. Every conversation, every piece of advice became a reinforcement of the principles I had fought to uphold. And there were moments of reflection too, silent evenings, when I let myself think about what had almost been lost, what could have destroyed me if I had faltered. Those moments reminded me that the battle was never about revenge, spite, or proving others wrong. It had always been about truth, integrity, and self-respect. By the time the first anniversary of Forge's official launch arrived, we had more clients than I had initially imagined, a solid reputation, and a core team that trusted each other implicitly. I stood in the office that night, alone for a brief moment, and let myself smile. The hum of fluorescent lights, the faint scent of coffee, and the quiet tap of keyboards became a symphony of accomplishment. I thought back to the early betrayal, to Dad's quiet dismissal, and to Brandon's arrogance. None of it mattered anymore. It had been a crucible that forged something far greater than resentment, a future that I had constructed entirely on my own terms. I picked up my phone one last time that evening. There was no need to message anyone, no need for validation. Instead, I set it down, leaned back, and looked out at the skyline once more. The city lights shimmered like a mosaic of endless possibilities. For the first time in years, I felt truly unshackled, fully capable, and completely at peace. The past had shaped me, but it no longer defined me. I had walked through fire, emerged stronger, and created a world where integrity mattered more than inheritance, and where effort and skill outweighed favoritism. I smiled quietly to myself. This was mine. Every achievement, every challenge, every triumph, built from scratch, forged through resilience. And I knew without a doubt that I would never let anyone else define my worth again.